I spun half my youth into thread, and in the end all I got was a single buyout slip worth 28,000 yuan. Today the life you are about to live belongs to a woman worker in a state-owned textile mill. You were born in a red brick row house in the factory housing compound, raised on the roar of machines. Beyond the windows stood tall chimneys, and cotton fibers drifted in the air. That was the scent of the working class. Your mother was a spinning frame tender at the mill, her hands always marked with fine grooves after work. She always said workers were the masters of the nation, and getting into the mill to eat the state's rice was the greatest blessing. You studied at the factory's children's school, the playground full of workers' kids. Everyone wore the same clothes, sang the same songs, and even shared the same dream: to grow up and become a worker in the mill. Every evening, when the shift bell rang, thousands of workers poured out the factory gate on bicycles. The sights surged like a tide, and you felt this was the most powerful image in all the world. The mill had its own bathhouse, canteen, cinema, even its own hospital. From birth to death, you could hand your life to the factory. The outside world felt far away, so far it hardly seemed to exist. What you longed for most was to wear your mother's blue work uniform. You believed that once you entered the mill, your whole life would be settled, never again fearing hunger, never again troubled by worry. At 16, your mother's health failed, and she could no longer work the 3 rotating shifts. By the rules of the time, a child could replace a parent in the mill, so you took over her spinning machine. But you never expected trouble on your very first day. The master tried to teach you to join broken threads, yet you simply could not learn it, sweating with panic, nearly sent back to be reassigned elsewhere. That night you hid in a corner of the workshop and cried quietly, feeling you had shamed your mother. An old frame tender came over, said nothing, just laid her hands over yours and slowly guided you through it once. From then on you practiced, as if possessed. While others rested, you practiced joining threads. While others slept, you memorized the rules. 3 months later, your joining speed was the fastest in the whole workshop. Over 1,000 spindles spun at once, and if a thread broke, you could rejoin it in 3 seconds. In the deafening roar of machines, you trained your eyes and hands until you and the machine became one. You began to understand where those grooves on your mother's hands had come from. Each was a mark of time, each the price of that iron rice bowl. Yet your heart held only pride, not the slightest resentment. The mill held a skills competition, and you won round after round. The moment you stood on stage to receive the award, applause filled the hall, and your mother wiped her tears in the crowd. It was the brightest moment of your life. Some said a frame tender's work was bitter and exhausting, but you saw it differently. Your thread became cloth. The cloth became clothing worn by countless people. You felt you were weaving garments for the whole nation. In your early 20s, you became the workshop's best, drawing full wages and bonuses. In that era, a textile woman worker was an enviable identity, and matchmakers nearly wore down your doorstep. You married a young man from the neighboring machine repair shop, both of you factory people. The marital home was a single room in a dormitory the mill assigned, 20 square meters, yet you felt you owned the whole world. On your wedding day, all the sisters from the workshop came. There was no grand banquet, just a room full of candy, sunflower seeds, and laughter. You pasted up red happiness characters and lived your days warm and full. The next year you had a daughter, and before your confinement month ended you were already thinking of the workshop. The mill had a nursery, so you dropped the child off by day and picked her up after work, neither job nor child neglected. The factory nursery, the children's school, the workers' hospital covered your child from birth to schooling. Your family lived in the compound, and whoever cooked something good shared it around. Such was the good of the work unit system. In the years the mill ran best, orders came faster than they could be filled, machines running around the clock on 3 shifts. The welfare handed out at festivals could fill half a room, towels, soap, rice, everything you could want. You were named a model worker. Your photo hung in the most prominent spot on the honor board. Passing that wall each day, you felt your whole life was worth it. Your youth devoted to textiles, a glory. Back then your greatest worry was how to spend your bonus, a dress for your daughter or a watch for your husband. You never once imagined such steady good days could ever come to an end. Your daughter topped her class at the children's school, and teachers praised her as one with a future. You and your husband planned that when she grew up she too would enter the mill, 3 generations of textile workers, so respectable. On the mill's 30th anniversary, all the workers lined up for a giant group photo. Thousands crowded the plaza before the main building, a dark mass of people, and you stood in the middle, a steady drop in that vast sea. As the 90s arrived, the wind changed. Small private mills and imported fabrics suddenly appeared on the market, cheaper and more varied, and your mill's orders fell away one by one. At first no one believed it. A state-owned mill this large, feeding generations, how could it possibly collapse overnight? Yet unsold cloth piled higher in the warehouse, and wages began arriving late. From above came a new manager with 4 words: cut staff to boost efficiency. Overnight the workshop filled with dread, everyone fearing they would be the one cut, and for the first time silence crept into the roar of machines. First the nursery closed, then the children's school was merged into the local district. The factory that once managed you from cradle to grave began shedding its burdens piece by piece, and the compound grew cold and quiet. Half the 3-shift machine stopped. You and your sisters took turns on duty, working only 2 weeks a month. Passing the empty workshop after a shift, those familiar machines lay as silent as if asleep. You could not understand it. Your thread was still just as fine, your skill had not slipped at all, yet there was nowhere left to use it. For the first time you realized that skill alone cannot stop the turning of an era. Your husband's machine repair shop was the first to fold, the whole unit laid off. A man who once stood tall sat at home with his head down, saying nothing, and you knew the sky of this family was starting to fall. The first list of reassignments was posted at the factory gate. You squeezed into the crowd searching for your name, your heart pounding hard. In that moment you finally understood, the iron rice bowl you trusted could shatter too. In 1998, the mill formally stopped production and restructured. You received a buyout agreement, calculated by years of service, 1,000 yuan a year, 28 years, 28,000 yuan in all. 28,000 yuan. Your finest youth, the awards you had won, the millions of meters of thread you had spun, all converted into this one number, a single sum to settle away the better half of your life. On the day you signed, a long line waited outside the office, all old workmates like you. No one made a fuss, everyone just signed in silence and walked out in silence, as if bidding farewell to half a lifetime. The moment you walked out the factory gate, you turned to look at that familiar tall chimney. It would never smoke again. You suddenly realized you were no longer a worker and no longer knew just what you were meant to be. That buyout money paid for your husband's illness and your daughter's tuition and was gone before long. A person in her 40s, with old folks above and a child below, you could not break down. You had to find a new way to live. You went to the job market, but one look at your age and they shook their heads. All your life you only knew how to spin, yet the outside world no longer needed that craft, and you became a person the era had returned. You refused to give up. You set up a small stall at the vegetable market entrance, selling socks and gloves. The hands of a model worker reached out for the first time to haggle, your face burning with shame, but you held it in. When the stall failed, you became a cleaner, mopping floors and wiping glass in office towers. Later you joined a private clothing factory's workshop, paid by the piece, no benefits, yet still those quick hands, still working just as hard. And so the years were endured one by one. Your daughter never entered a mill, going south to work and later settling in the city. You and your husband kept the old house, kept getting by on that meager pension. The pension was only so much a month, just enough for medicine and groceries. You budgeted carefully, unwilling to buy yourself a new garment, yet proud all your life. You never once cried hardship before your daughter. One day you passed the old factory grounds, and the whole mill had been torn down. Where the spinning workshop once stood now rose brand new apartments and a huge shopping mall, neon lights blinding, unrecognizable. You stood dazed at the entrance of the new mall. The ground beneath your feet had once held the workshop where you stood for decades. The place that once made cloth now sold foreign brand clothing, and no one remembered its past. The mall hung imported ready-made clothes, expensive and beautiful. You touched the price on a tag and remembered that spinning thread your whole life could not buy a single garment like this, and a feeling rose you could not name. Now and then the old sisters still gather, huddling together to talk of the old days. Some have done well, some have it hard, yet the moment they speak of racing for speed in the workshop, every pair of eyes lights up. You often tell your daughter, "Mom never saved any money in this life, but I have no regrets. I kept to my duty, I spun my thread well, worthy of that uniform and worthy of that model worker plaque." You have always kept that long faded model worker certificate hanging at your bedside. The machines are gone, the mill is gone, but that youth spent giving everything was real, and the glory of having once been a master, no one can take away. She spent a lifetime of youth spinning millions of meters of thread, and in the end got back only 28,000 yuan and a body full of illness. If it were you standing before that buyout slip, would you sign and accept it? For the next life, pick one. A, the small boss who built a business from nothing after being laid off, or B, the last village teacher staying behind in a mountain hamlet. Tell me in the comments.